It's the Power Hour podcast, week 2. Johnny, what's going on?
Just drinking a natty light, man, because lost all my money last week.
It's a rightful punishment if I've ever seen one. Before we get into that, I want to give a few shout outs because even though we stunk last week, some of our followers didn't. They took our own advice that we didn't take. Shout out to our boy Joe Pano, huge fan of the podcast, and we're both huge fans of him as well. His Twitter handle is at Pano, Paeno. He took down a GPP last week. Shout out to Simon Brown at Super SI9, who won 25,000 the Millie Maker. He tweeted at us right after he won it. I'm not sure if he actually listens because he shouted out like 50 other dudes, but he tweeted us, so we'll give him a quick shout out. And also shout out to Lewis at LA on the air. Meant to shout him out last week when we were talking about Sharon and the 5 people who followed us this time last year. He's one of our first listeners to the podcast. He came really close to taking down a Jeep last year. He won like 4,000. Yeah, so props to all those guys. So one thing you're always going to get from this show is honesty. We may not be the best DFS show out there. Just kidding. We're the best. But we're also honest. We got absolutely rocked last week. We put down $100 in our joint account lineup thing. We played all cash games. We won back only $24. Week one's tough, and we knew that going in. We were close on a lot of guys, but we just got rocked. Let's talk about some of the plays where we went wrong.
So, one of the biggest things that really just sort of crushed us, and this was a really tough position this week, but Must Start Tellus Bennett turned out to actually be who I now refer to as Must Tilt Tellus Bennett, because we spent the evening tilting him as he did absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and shout out to Runford Johnny, who kind of called us out on Twitter about it. And even called me on the phone Saturday morning. I was like, you sure you want to do that? Maybe just like hedge a little bit. He was just like way down on Bennett for exactly the reason we should have been. He just blocked a ton. The Patriots had 2 starting offensive linemen out, and Bennett played or blocked on like 25% of the pass blocking snaps, just like one of the highest rates. Really just didn't expect that. And Bennett stunk, and that's why, and that's a lesson learned. Going forward, we'll take better account of offensive line injuries, opponents, blitz percentage, things like that. Lesson learned on this one. Anything to add, John?
Yeah. So we do some joint lineups from the pod, and then I also run some cash lineups on my own. And the one mistake that I made that I definitely told people not to make last week was panicking with lineups Sunday morning. And we knew Saturday night going in that TJ Yeldon was probably going to be the starter. And my plan was to play Yeldon, Ware, and Kristen Michael and use Matthew Stafford at quarterback. So instead, in my panicky stupor, I got real excited that I had a couple extra dollars left and I could use Russell Wilson, who was a player that I was not on at all the entire week. So had I stuck with my gut and used Matthew Stafford, I would have probably made like 1K. Instead, I'm here drinking natty fucking light.
Yeah, so you, on our joint account, you talked me into the Kristen Michael, Russell Wilson stack, and I'm a huge fan of pairing my quarterback and running back together in cash, especially when they have a line like the Seahawks did. I still don't know if that was really a terrible play. Russell Wilson had an ankle injury. He was less mobile. His throws were terrible. They were just lollipop throws. It was just bad all around. Kristen Michael, though, had the volume we were kind of looking for. TJ Yeldon, too, who I argued to play over Ware. I still kind of think that was maybe the right play. Yeldon got 21 carries and 5 targets. That's exactly what we're looking for. He just stunk, averaging at 1.9 yards per carry. And then where the beat writers were 100% right. He played about 50% of the snaps. He got like 50% of the targets. He just went completely off on that kind of lower volume. But yeah, I mean, if you showed me Yeldon's carries and targets versus Ware's carries and targets, despite the matchup, I'm probably going to play Yeldon every time at his price.
I think the thing that really bolstered Ware that was kind of the question was that he saw a ton of passing work. I think he had 8 catches, and people, if you read into the beats, they said that West was really going to be that passing back, and it seemed like Ware got a lot more of that work. So, you know, we were wrong. We were also right in a sense. Really, it just didn't work out. Or you could have been like me and used Ware and still not cashed anywhere. So
there's also Marvin Jones, who we whiffed on. But again, I still really like that play. The volume was there. He had, what was it, like?
He had 10 targets.
10 targets?
10.
Yeah, 10 targets. He only caught 4. Still got 85 yards. He had 1 drop. Yeah, I'm still gonna. I still think that was a good call. You know, like 10 targets at his price is a great play. We were both on Fuller. I kind of talked you out of him in cash. I think Fuller was a great play.
Yeah, and let me just say something about Fuller. And you know, people want to discount preseason, but if you watched Fuller in the preseason, it almost looked like Fuller was the number 1 wide receiver there over Hopkins. The way that Osweiler just looked at him all the time. And we even sort of saw it in week 1 that Fuller is going to get tons of volume there. And he may not be the most efficient guy. He drops the ball. And he is a rookie, so he's going to have ups and downs. But I think you need to really remember that he's going to eat into DeAndre Hopkins' target volume, because Hopkins didn't have a guy like that beside him last year.
Yeah, I think that's right. All right, so enough bitching about how poorly we did last week. Honestly, this might have been like our worst week we've ever had.
Probably close to it.
Yeah, but you know, it's like a volatile sport, and I'm feeling really good about this week. I'm feeling actually really, really good.
Me too, man. Which
means we're either gonna like win all of our cash games, or we're just gonna get destroyed and tilt so hard. You want to start off with quarterbacks? I mean, there's really more than 2 quarterbacks, 2 or 3 quarterbacks, especially if you're in GPPs. There's a lot of like interesting sneaky plays, but for cash, at least, like I'm really only looking at 2, maybe 3 guys. That's Josh McCown as the cheaper quarterback, and Eli Manning, and maybe Cam Newton as well. But definitely, let's talk about Josh McCown. You know, we've talked all the time about targeting these cheaper quarterbacks. It's really worked out well for us. There's that chart that I've probably retweeted now like a bunch of times that I did. But Josh McCown's salary on both sites is the minimum. DraftKings it's 5,000. A 3.5x value for cash games implies he's going to score 17.5 DraftKings fantasy points. Well, guess what? He averaged 21.3 DraftKings fantasy points in every game. He played more than 75% of the snaps last year. He's had a huge upgrade to the wide receiver core. Philly allowed the 5th most passing yards per game last season. And I have no idea why they would do this last week, but they had the fastest offensive pace of any team last week. And I get the narrative with Hugh Jackson, how he loves to run the ball. There's been like some reports about Isaiah Crowell, but I mean, like only 7 teams had fewer rushing attempts last week, and I don't expect them to really be that close with Baltimore. I don't even think Baltimore is that good, but I think McCown is like a really sneaky bet or not sneaky, a really great bet to exceed value.
Yeah, and one thing too, last year in 2 games against Baltimore, he averaged 28.4 PPR points. And this defense is pretty much the same. Elvis Dumerville is probably not going to play. Terrell Suggs is having his snaps limited and monitored as he's coming back from a traumatic injury. And I'm not sure Baltimore was good last week or if the Bills were just bad. And I think it's probably more of the latter.
Yeah, I think McCown's going to surprise. I could see him throwing for multiple touchdowns and over 300 yards easy. But I want to talk about just how bad this Browns defense is in like every aspect of the ball. I think Flacco could have a huge day. I like Flacco a lot in GPPs.
Yep.
And I really like McCown at his current price. I mean, it could be a sneaky shootout. I just see the Browns really just passing a lot this week.
Yep, I'm with you there.
All right, well, the next game then is Saints and Giants. Last year, Week 8, 2015. Drew Brees was the QB1. Ben Watson was the tight end 1. Colston, Cooks, and Snead all finished in the top 10 at their position. Mark Ingram was the RB9. Eli Manning was the QB2. Odell Beckham was the wide receiver 1. Dwayne Harris was the wide receiver 20. Shane Vereen was the RB4. Both Eli and Cam's QB games ranked among the top 5 for the entire season. This was also the third highest scoring game of all time. Note, the Saints are not at home. Everyone has – I posted these stats earlier, and everyone just – yeah, but Brees stinks away. I'm like, all right, I get it. Still, highest over-under the week. Both of the defenses are fairly bad, at least in the secondary. I expect the Giants to go off. The Saints are playing a guy at cornerback they signed just 2 weeks ago. And then right behind him are 3 cornerbacks who had played 0 snaps prior to week 1.
Yeah, so the thing about the whole, Brees stinks on the road or whatever, he still usually throws for yardage and whatnot. He's just not as efficient. He doesn't throw the touchdowns. He throws more picks. This game is going to have tons of passing. And we're not advocating for playing Drew Brees. No one's out here telling you to go play Drew Brees. He's now the highest priced quarterback on DraftKings. So Eli Manning, he doesn't even, Eli doesn't have to throw for 6 touchdowns again to hit value at 7K. He has to throw for a touchdown or 2 and 300 yards, and you're fine. And on top of that, he's probably going to be the most heavily owned quarterback, probably 20, 30%. And if he does throw for 6 touchdowns, you're going to be way behind. So it's going to be hard to not use Eli this week. So I think I'm down to 3 quarterbacks. I think someone who I wasn't as high on until probably the last 2 days or so.
All right. Well, I'm not done with Eli Manning. I got one more stat for you.
All right.
Against New Orleans over their last 17 games, so all of last season and last week, QBs have scored on average 26.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game. In those 17 games, they've scored over 40 DraftKings points twice, over 30, 6 times, over 25, 9 times, over 20, 14 times. And like the quarterbacks who didn't was like Case Keenum and I think that one
Brian
Hoyer
fucking
game.
Hoyer.
Yeah, exactly. That one Hoyer game.
Yeah.
And Eli Manning's DraftKings salary this week is $7,600. So a 3.5x valuation implies 26.6 DraftKings fantasy points, aka essentially the Saints' typical average against. Eli Manning is a home favorite. My streamer article that really rates out really highly. That's exactly what we're looking for. I think Eli's a great play. I think McCown's a great play. And then tell me about the third guy.
Well, one thing too, just go ahead and tell everyone who the Saints are starting at cornerback this week. Did you mention that already? I
did. Dude, it's so bad. I'm hearing the guy that he just signed off of his couch 2 weeks ago is projected to get the start. But then right after him, fighting for those 2 starting roles, Ken Crowley, who's an undrafted rookie free agent who PFF says has no business even playing in the league. He was the 13th worst corner in pass coverage grade his senior season last year out of 104 qualifying. That is terrible. Like, really should not even be in the NFL. Then there's PJ Williams, was a third-round draft pick in 2015. He tore his hamstring before the start of week 1, so he never played a snap. These two guys combined to allow 10 receptions on 15 targets for 163 yards and a touchdown last week. And then there's Devontae Harris, who's also an undrafted free agent. He's projected to man the slot. Yeah, this is just a shit show. Eli Manning should just completely lose his mind, as well as Odell Beckham, Sterling Shepard, and maybe even Victor Cruz.
Yep. All right. So one other quarterback that I think you can consider, who I'm probably not on as much as a lot of other people. I think he's going to be pretty popular. He might probably be the second most owned quarterback behind Eli Manning, and that's Cam Newton. It's interesting because he's only 300 more than Eli, but they are a 14-point favorite, and we have seen the Panthers have no trouble putting Derek Anderson into a game that's out of hand. If they're up 14 points going into the fourth quarter, I don't think Cam plays the fourth quarter. So he's probably someone I'm not on as much. I think they'll probably run the ball more. No reason for him to be throwing it and running it if they're winning. So less love for Cam this week than the community, but I think he's definitely really interesting against that scrub defense. Well, we're not actually sure if they're a scrub defense, but we think they're a scrub defense for the price that he is. But I think I still probably lean Eli Manning here. Someone I know I'm going to get four quarters from.
All right, I'm not as high on Cam as the rest of them, but I get the thought process that went into that. Wide receivers, we just talked about New Orleans secondary. I think Odell Beckham Jr. is the uber mega chalk. He dropped over 40 DraftKings fantasy points on Delvin Breaux last year. Bro's actually pretty good. Instead, he gets these schmucks. I just think he's going to lose his mind, and I'm starting every lineup with Beckham in there.
So I'm for me, it's a slightly different process on Beckham. I think for me, it's like Eli or Beckham. I think you can use both of them too. The thing that I think hurts Beckham a little bit more this year than last year is that Cruz is back and Sterling Shepard is actually like okay, but I still think Beckham's probably going to go bananas. I just think his ceiling is probably capped a little bit more so with these other guys there. Any thoughts on that, Scott?
I don't know. Victor Cruz had 4 catches for 34 yards. They got the 2 touchdowns. I think Odell Beckham Jr. is just going to get fed, and he's going to eat like a slob and just destroy this defense. I think the fact that he didn't score any touchdowns last week, like narrative street right now, but I think that means Eli is just going to feed him extra heavy this week. I can't wait. Again, putting him in every single lineup. Again, this might make me lean more towards Hoyer over Eli, but yeah, I just absolutely love OBJ this week. I think even if he didn't get the touchdowns, even with Victor Cruz, who may or may not be dead, Sterling Shepard, I think he's still a lock to at least go over 100 yards. I have him in every lineup. Next wide receiver is someone who is definitely not as flashy, but he's such a power hour guy. Like last year, we made a ton of money on guys like Brian Hartline and Kamar Aiken. Yeah, we're going to get accused of chasing targets, but at the wide receiver position, we're going to chase targets all day or a day. I'm looking at Jeremy Curley. Right off the bat, you were like, Curly chalk. And I'm like, yep, 100%. He ranked second best in dollar per target value on DraftKings. Beasley was slightly higher, but, screw Beasley. Maybe not too crazy high of an upside, but at the stone cold minimum 3,000, love him.
Yeah. And it's like the whole idea, well, he's not going to score a touchdown. He doesn't have a ceiling, but people are playing Jarvis Landry at 6,000, and that's exactly what he is. So I think with the full PPR on DraftKings, Curly I probably wouldn't use on FanDuel. With the full PPR on DraftKings for 3,000, it's like a dude who's and I don't see why he's going to suddenly lose that role. He played in the slot. The slot has been the role to target for the 49ers or for Chip Kelly offenses since he's been in the NFL, and so we want that role. And the thing to remember too is that the reason he's only 3,000 is because they played on Monday night and there was no chance for them to raise his salary. So I think we should take advantage of that while we can. If he gets 10 targets again, he's going to hit value. Doesn't matter. And, everyone says, well, they're playing the Panthers defense. The Panthers defense is really good, except for their corners, who are all either bad or pretty much average. So I don't think he's going to have all that much trouble getting the ball, especially against a pass rush that will probably be working. So Gabbert's going to look at him often in the slot.
Yeah. So I completely agree, but there are some maybe devil's advocate arguments we could be making here. He only played on 60% of the snaps. And then Quentin Patton had himself a fine day as well. Any thoughts on those two arguments?
So the 60% of the snaps, I think, was widely because the 49ers were able to just run the shit out of the ball. They didn't need to put a third wide receiver on the field. If this game is going how everyone thinks it's going to be going, then they are going to need 3 wide receivers on the field because they're going to be losing. And I think he sees a much bigger percentage of the snaps. And to think that he only played 66% of the snaps but still saw 11 targets just tells you how important he is to the passing game there. And Quentin Patton is 3,800 this week, so his price is higher. He also had a fumble, and I believe he had less targets.
Yeah, so that was going to be my point is Quentin Patton and Torrey Smith combined for less targets than Jeremy Curley had. So I'm not too concerned about the snap counts. The targets were still there, and the game script is setting up probably nicer for the 49ers to go pass heavy. Or pass heavier, at least, because Chip Kelly's going to want to establish the run regardless. Next up, we have Will Fuller, who's kind of in that price range. You already talked about how much you like him. Curley was better on a points per or target per dollar basis, but Will Fuller was better on a target yards per dollar basis. He got like 11 targets, and then those targets were also had like really high ranked really highly in depth of target. So essentially that means he got better quality targets and a lot of them. He's not that much higher price than Curley. What are your thoughts on Fuller?
And if he had caught that would-be 80-yard touchdown pass that he dropped, he would be like 5,500 this week. And everyone would be playing him. He would be like the mega fucking chalk. But he ended up with a really good game, not the wide receiver one game that he might have ended up with if he had caught that pass. So I think he's a guy that you have to consider. The only reason that I might be a little down on the Houston passing game is that the Chiefs are going to be missing both of their starting offensive guards, and the Texans defense is pretty good. So there's a chance that they may have a pretty, run heavy game against them. But I still think that even if Fuller loses a few targets, he's still in consideration this week, just because it really only takes one catch for him to pay off that $4K salary.
Yeah, my concern isn't that the Texans run away with it, but I think there's a good chance it could just be like a total slap fest between these two teams. But yeah, I mean, I like Fuller. I think he's completely in play. We might just lean Curley, though, because he's cheaper. And yeah. And so next up we have Travis Benjamin, who's a guy you and me have talked a lot about this week so far. What's interesting about him is all 7 of his targets came after Keenan died. He really just kind of took over that role. He had an obscenely low average depth of target. He was in the low 3 range. But yeah, if he gets that Keenan role, that's such a valuable high amount of targets role. Let's see how many, what his ADOT was. It was, 2.9, which is kind of Keenan-esque. I'm not into Inman or that other guy whose name I'm not going to pronounce right, and he doesn't deserve proper pronunciation of his name until he actually does something. But for some reason, they're both getting a lot of love on Twitter. I think Benjamin's kind of a sneaky play. I don't think he's going to be the boom bust deep threat people thought he was with Keenan out. What do you think, Johnny?
Yeah, so I think the whole Dontrell Inman, people still remember he had like 2 relevant games in like 2014 when all of the Chargers receivers were dead back then. And you played him, he was like 4K, he had like 80 yards or something back when daily fantasy was harder and you couldn't find any value. So people still are stuck on that. And then he hasn't really done shit other than that ever. Then you look at and people are automatically sort of putting him into the slot role, and I don't know that he's guaranteed that role. We have no idea what this offense is going to look like without Keenan Allen in it, and I wouldn't be surprised if Travis Benjamin plays in the slot some this week as well. So then Tyrell Williams is kind of this, he's this big 6'2" guy who had a ton of offseason buzz. He was sweet in the preseason. And I think a lot of DFS players that are still thinking about the preseason are sort of remembering him as like a stud next step up kind of guy. But that was in the preseason. And he was playing against backups a lot of the time. And while there are notes to take away from the preseason, I don't think the notes to take away were that a guy did really well against backup defensive players. So I think Tyrell is kind of this dynasty Pokemon card that people are excited is going to be playing. So I don't really see this huge role that everyone's projecting, like that Tyrell is suddenly going to come in and be the wide receiver 1 in San Diego. I think Travis Benjamin and Antonio Gates are going to see the most targets out of them, and don't really think that Inman and Tyrell are really going to be all that relevant.
All right. I agree. So with this podcast, I make a point kind of not to listen to any other podcasts. I kind of don't want to get bogged down by groupthink or anything like that. I do make a point to listen to like one Silva podcast before I do this, and then I'll listen to DFS Edge or and a few other podcasts after this. But I definitely make it a point not to get swayed by groupthink. But it'll still happen every now and then on Twitter. But one guy I've heard no one talk about who I assumed was super chalky this week was Julian Edelman. He's up against Miami, and Miami allowed the 8th most yards per target to slot receivers last season. He was just like so chalky in cash all of last season. If we take out week 10, where he left shortly after the first quarter with an injury, Edelman would have ranked 6th among wide receivers on a fantasy points per game basis. His price is stupid low. His average DraftKings salary last season was over $7,500. This week it's $6,200. Gronk is probably not playing. Hogan was limited in practice today. I think he's a great play, and looking at Fantasy Aces ownership levels where it's at 1%, it looks like I assumed he was like kind of chalky, and now it's looking like he's a contrarian play, but I like him for my cash lineup. Johnny, what do you think?
So I really like Edelman this week too. I struggle with him just because I'm not so sure that the Patriots offense is really going to have to throw a whole lot against Miami. I think I like Edelman a lot more as a tournament play. I think you could use him in cash games, but I think I would probably struggle to use him over some other similar guys in that price range. I really do like him though, and I'm going to have a lot of him in GPPs because I think he draws a really nice matchup, and he did catch 7 of his 7 targets last week, but only for 66 yards. So I think he's got a chance to go over 100 and score a touchdown and probably pay off that salary, but not sure I'm going to end up with him in cash, but I do like him a lot.
Yeah, I guess I like him slightly more. I mean, he does have Garoppolo throwing him the ball, but he did well last week in a pretty tough matchup against Tyrann Mathieu in the slot and Patrick Peterson outside. But yeah, he just is that prototypical like wide receiver you want in cash games, where he has that really high floor just because He gets all these receptions. It does seem like I do like him more than you. Moving in, are we back on Marvin Jones this week? His price really hasn't moved up at all.
Yeah, so that's a guy that I would probably prefer over like a Julian Edelman. Marvin Jones saw 10 targets. He was involved in the red zone. He had 85 yards when he only caught 4 of those 10. That offense is going to pass the ball. Stafford has just been phenomenal since Jim Bob Cooter took over. It's clear that Golden Tate is playing the Golden Tate while Calvin Johnson was alive role with a very short passing game. And Marvin Jones is the deeper passing option. And Marvin Jones is essentially playing the Calvin Johnson role, running down the field, deeper slants, active in the red zone type role. And I think it's super valuable. And I think, he was maybe 1 or 2 missed catches from having a really big game. And I think people would have been more excited about him if he wasn't so popular and we hadn't had, all summer to talk about how he was going to crush his value. So he was like 15 yards away from crushing that value. So I think he's in play again. We want volume, and if you're going to get 10 targets for $5K, that's really hard to pass up.
Yeah, I'm not so sold on him being Calvin Johnson 2.0. Just looking at what he did this week, he had like a fairly pedestrian average depth of target. It was like 12.0, which is kind of like mediocre to sub-mediocre. It's kind of in like the slot range. He didn't see too many deep targets, which is what PFF refers to as targets that travel more than 20 yards or more through the air. And just like looking at Stafford, he's just not someone who excites me if I have a receiver. He had the lowest average depth of target in the league last week. He's kind of like Alex Smith 2.0 for sure. And he's just feeding all these short, shallow targets to running backs. I mean, I do like Marvin Jones. The targets were there for sure. And he's still definitely way underpriced compared to what he should be. But I'm not sure if I like him more than Edelman. But I guess that's where we diverge this week.
I just think that he's guaranteed more volume than Edelman. That's my big thing.
Could be. I also like Edelman's matchup more. All right. I guess moving on.
More guy. There's one more guy in that range, so let's talk about him. Who's in between? Well, actually, there's 2 in between. Which one you want to do first?
Are you talking about Snead?
Yeah, let's talk about Snead.
All right. Yeah, I mean, already talked about. You're going to kind of want to get some exposure to this game. And Snead's super cheap, and he's their slot receiver. Like everyone thinks Michael Thomas was going to get that big slot role, but that never made sense to me. He only had like 2 targets out of the slot his senior year in college. And then last week, he barely played the slot when I don't have the numbers on me, but I sent it to you. But Snead played the slot in like 66% of his snaps. Really think that's where you attack the Giants. That's where they're the most vulnerable. I mean, Cromartie did play a good amount of his snaps from the slot, but at the same time, still like the safeties and linebacking core is just so bad that I just think he's a great, tremendous play. This game is the highest over-under, regardless of what you may think about Breeze away. I really think this is going to be one of the top 2, 3 high, if not the most highest scoring game of the week. I also think we talked about it a little bit before, but I think Breeze away is kind of a false narrative that he stinks away. He definitely doesn't stink away. He's just God mode when he's home, and then when he's away, he's just one of the best quarterbacks. Like Andrew Luck, since he's been in the league, has averaged 23.95 fantasy points per game. Drew Brees, just away from 2011 to 2015, averaged 23.57 fantasy points per game. For perspective, that's over a half a point better than Russell Wilson. That's about 2 points better than Ben Roethlisberger. That's over 3 points better than Eli Manning. And that's including their home away splits. This is just Breeze's away splits.
Yeah, and from between 2011 and 2016, he throws for 330 yards at home, and he averages 317 yards on the road. So the thing is that he's still averaging 300 yards a game, and that affects the efficiency affects him where he's throwing less touchdowns, less or more interceptions, affects him more than it affects his wide receivers on a PPR site that pays a 3-point bonus for going over 100 yards. And then everyone is citing these Willie Snead home road splits from last year, and they're conveniently leaving out the fact that on one of his road games last year, he was like really hurt. He had this bad, I can't remember if it was a foot or an ankle injury, and he was a decoy. Like he was literally just like hobbling around the field. He had 1 target, 0 catches, and that bombs somebody's home road splits when you're a decoy on one of your road games for your splits. So if you have to remove the Washington game if you are going to do those home road splits for Snead, and it's a lot closer and more reasonable when you do that.
Yeah, and again, just look at what Cole Beasley did that last week.
Oh my God.
Snead is so much better than Cole Beasley.
Yeah, dude, I like him. A lot of people are down on him, and I guess it's like they don't want to chase or something, but
here's what I'm kind of thinking we might do with our cash game lineup. I think we go we don't take Eli. We take McCown, and then we go Snead and Odell Beckham.
And then we can play there's another stud receiver we'll talk about later. But dude, I like Snead. I don't know if do we need to say any more about Snead? Do you want to talk about Sanders?
Yeah, I kind of like Sanders. I think he's a sneaky, or maybe not too sneaky. I think he's a sneaky GBP play and or a sneaky cash play, and a really good GPP play. He just has like an awesome matchup, and Demaryius Thomas was limited. Let's see what I have written up on him because I lost it. The Lions went 31 for 39 for 340 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Colts. The C-Man, as bad as he might be, or inexperienced, or bad against pressure, the blitz, he might go off. He's actually also a sneaky GPP play himself. And I love Sanders.
Yeah.
He's been more efficient than Demaryius Thomas for 2 consecutive years.
Yeah, and Demaryius has been hurt all week, and the last time I read something about him, Beat said that he has spent more time on the sidelines than he has on the field. So if Demaryius Thomas is out, then Sanders becomes a really, really interesting play, I think. I mean, where would you rank him, I guess? How much would you like him if Demaryius Thomas were to sit?
Ignoring price, he's easily top 15, probably in that 10 to 15 range.
Yeah, I think
he just has, I mean, I don't like the C-Man, but the matchup is just so attractive. The Lions lack so much depth there in their secondary.
The Colts?
I'm sorry, the Colts. Yeah. The Colts played the Lions last week. Yeah.
And the downside is that it's a 425 game, so we might not know. But I think the upside for that is sort of more of a GPP upside. If you get that late news and you want to start throwing him in some lineups, people don't react to late news, so that's something to consider for sure.
All right, you want to talk about how many more do we have? We just have one more, right?
Do you want to talk about AJ Green if you're going to fit 2 studs?
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, let's do it.
All right, you go first.
All right, so AJ Green has these interesting splits. If I can find them, it has been historically better on the road, which is really strange. But he has also been better against the Steelers than he has over his career averages. I believe he's averaged two more PPR fantasy points against them And while that's not like a crazy amount of points, that's still actionable enough to say that he has been good against the Steelers. And he saw an insane amount of targets last week. This was a prediction that a lot of people had coming into the season, that he was just going to be a target monster with no Eifert, no Marvin Jones, no Sanu. He saw 13 targets. He caught 12 of them for 180 yards. It's just hard to ignore what he did last week. And it's hard to ignore that target volume. 13 targets is a lot, man.
Yeah, so this kind of actually surprised me, just because everyone said this last year too when Eifert went down. Granted, A.J. McCarron was playing at quarterback, but that wasn't the case at all. Actually, the opposite was true. He had 8.8 targets per game when Eifert played and averaged 17.7 fantasy points per game. And when Eifert was out, he averaged 2.8 fewer targets and 2.7 fewer fantasy points per game. Again, that is A.J. McCarron, but still, you should have expected the targets to increase. But it looks like that narrative might be wrong, or maybe it's right, and we have to wait another week, and they were just exploiting Revis, who is cooked. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think he did exploit Revis on his long touchdown, but I still think the 13 targets is what's most actionable. You look at Julio Jones had 8 targets, Odell Beckham had 8 targets, and then Antonio Brown had 11 targets. So of these studs, he way out targeted these guys. So he's Andy Dalton's dude, and especially in a divisional game where I'm guessing that they will probably be trailing the Steelers a little bit. I think he probably sees a ton of work. It's hard to ignore him. Plus, Steelers secondary is trash.
That is true. Yeah, I agree. All right. Anyone else left at the position?
I don't think there is anybody left. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Moving on to running backs. Early this week, I tweeted out my bell cow chart, and this is from an article I did over the summer. Basically, I believe we should be targeting bell cow running backs in DFS and maybe even season long. And I'm defining a bell cow running back as a running back who gets at least 66% of the team's running back snaps, running back carries, and running back targets. Last season, bell cow running backs averaged, or actually over the last 3 seasons, bell cow running backs averaged 18.1 fantasy points per game. Non-bell cow running backs with at least 50% of their snaps, which is still a lot and kind of skewing against us, averaged only 13.3 fantasy points per game. Bell cow running backs have a crazy low bust rate. And as I outlined in this piece I wrote a while back, like opportunity is really the king at this position. Snaps, carries, targets all had a much higher correlation than like efficiency and even things like yards and touchdowns. It was crazy. And so just looking at that and looking at these bell cow running backs, there's a few guys who really stand out to me. The first, who I think is super, super insanely chalky, is Jeremy Langford. He's a guy like I've always hated. Shout out to Aaron Butler, who's a big Langford truther, but he's got the role that I never thought would have happened. In week 1, he commanded 96% of the team's running back snaps, 95% of the team's running back touches. He's up against he's in a great matchup this week. I have to pull up my stat on it. But yeah, last week he 96% of the snaps, 94% of the carries, 100% of the targets. And he's only 4,600, and he's up against a defense that allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs last season. He was just inefficient last year on that last week on that volume.
It doesn't matter.
I still really love him this week.
Yeah. And dude, the Eagles just they let Isaiah Crowell do things. So well, I mean, let's talk about running backs that aren't really all that good. So Langford is going to get receiving work. He is going to get the goal line carries. and he is going to get tons of carries. I don't think he's particularly good. I think he still does exactly what he did when I watched him on film last year, and is that he just, as soon as someone touches him, he goes down, which is fine. If you're going to get 20 carries, 5 targets, and goal line work, doesn't matter. He's too cheap for his role. We were playing like Tim Hightower for this price last year. So, I mean, if you can get this type of bell cow role, you just got to go for it. Unfortunately, he's only on the Thursday through Monday slate, so he's a guy to super heavily consider if you played the Thursday slate on DraftKings, or if you're playing on FanDuel Sunday, Monday. But can't use him if you're playing Sunday only.
Agreed. So moving on to the next bell cow running back, who is also terribly inefficient, TJ Yeldon. Slightly higher price than Langford. Langford's probably the cheapest out of all these bell cow running backs. What are your thoughts on Yeldon? I loved him last week, and the volume was right, but he stunk it up. What do you think?
Yeah, so like Yeldon does stink, but the role is like really, really nice. Ivory's probably not going to play. The Chargers just got obliterated by Spencer Ware, particularly in the passing game, and Yeldon did see 6 targets last week. So if he's going to see 6 targets again, he should be able to put up a better stat line against the Chargers. And he got 21 attempts. He was bad. He only had 39 rushing yards. But, Green Bay has had good rushing defenses in the past. So this could be a product of that. We don't really know. But we do know that the Chargers just allowed Spencer Ware to run for 6.4 yards per carry. And I love Spencer Ware. He is not a 6.4 yards per carry back. And I think this is a great spot, especially since everyone hates him, to use him again. Probably end up with him in cash lineups again, and just cross my fingers that gets more PPR, gets the same amount of PPR work that he got last week.
And Langford's $100 cheaper than Yeldon. I think Langford's easy chalk, and I guess Yeldon just being $100 more expensive, a little bit less so. But he's super chalky for me as well. The next closest priced bell cow running back is DeMarco Murray. Everyone thought it was going to be the Derrick Henry show, but he was featured, like his coaches said. So at least it's going to be a few weeks before that might come to fruition. So 70% of the snaps, 72% of the carries, 71% of the targets. He scored 23.7 fantasy points. He's 5,700. And what's really interesting about him is he had the second most goal line opportunities last week. He had 3 goal line targets and 1 goal line carry.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about the Lions is that they got sort of lit up across the middle by the tight ends for the Colts. And if Tajay Sharp is drawing a lot of coverage from Darius Slay, then that's going to mean that Delaney Walker and DeMarco Murray are going to be really busy in the passing game, because the Titans essentially punted at wide receiver last week, and they really just didn't really use a second wide receiver. They just kind of scrambled a bunch of guys in there running different kinds of packages, and mainly just used Tajay Sharp as their only wide receiver.
Yeah, that's an awesome breakdown, Johnny. I'm buying that too, and that's why we didn't bring up Tajay Sharp before. Me and Johnny both write articles on wide receiver versus cornerback matchups. We think it's one of the most underrated things in DFS that you really need to pay attention to. And if Sharp's going to be on Slay like we think he will be, you're definitely not going to play him over guys like Fuller and Curley, who are in that same price range. Next running back, we have CJ Anderson, who is everyone's chalk. He had 86% of the snaps, 87% of the carries, 80% of the targets. He's 6,800. And this is just a dream matchup. The Colts allowed 56.9 fantasy points to running backs in week 1. That was the most of any team by a lot. Johnny, are we playing CJ? What's the deal?
Yeah, I think CJ Anderson is like one of those 100% ownership type guys. This is what we thought CJ Anderson was and is before he got hurt last year and disappointed everyone who owned him. He is a 20 carry, 5 target type back, which is exactly what he got last week. He will get the goal line work. He is going to be who they try to hide Trevor Seaman behind. And he plays for a team that has probably the best defense in the league. He's going to be fed until he breaks down. And as long as it's early in the season, we need to ride him until that happens. He should be priced up with the top guys, and just think that he is cheaper than Adrian Peterson and Todd Gurley, both of which I would not fucking play at all until we see something different from them. So Anderson, dude, just put him in your lineup. And, you look at that big bright green 30-second against the run for the Colts on DraftKings and just know that everyone is going to be on him. It's not going to be, the public's not going to play CJ Anderson this week. Everyone's going to play CJ Anderson. So if you try to fade him in cash games and he goes off like we think he is, you're fucked.
So I like that you said they're going to feed him until he breaks down. I think a lot of people are going to be concerned because they saw Booker get that third carry in the game. CJ had Anderson had 2 great runs. Then Booker came in and then fumbled. Then really wasn't seen or heard from too much after that. They're going to think and be like, oh, maybe it was just a fumble, and then this week he'll get a bigger workload. But I think Johnny's closer on the point. CJ Anderson was a guy I was really high on in redraft, and partly because I spent some time talking to Cecil Lammey, who's probably easily my favorite beat writer out there. Does a radio show for the Broncos. He also works with football guys. He said pretty much to me that this year CJ Anderson decides when he gets off the field. Think about the Super Bowl. He was basically not healthy from halfway through week 1, like the halftime of week 1, all the way until like week 18. And you saw it in the playing time. Hillman, who was terrible, had a horrible yards per carry average, was getting more playing time than CJ Anderson, who led the league in yards per carry over the second half of the season. And I buy that this year. This is last year. He was their head coach Kubiak was running a Peyton Manning offense. He wasn't running the Kubiak offense. And I think this year that changes. And I think CJ Anderson is going to get a huge workload. He's going to be a consistent every week bell cow. I love his prospects, and he is a must start for me. And I think it's going to come down to Langford, Yeldon, CJ Anderson, and DeMarco Murray. We're going to have to pick 3 running backs out of that 4. But there are some more running backs we like this week.
Yeah. And I think Anderson's just a lock. There's really not much more to say for him.
Yep.
Yeah.
Next up is a guy you love, and I love too, Lamar Miller, who accounted for 91.4% of Houston's running back touches last week. Huge bell cow game. He had 32 touches last week. In 61 career games with Miami, he never reached even 25 touches in a game. So he pretty much got the workload we were all hoping and wishing for. The efficiency wasn't really there, but I think there's good reason to suspect it comes around this week. Johnny, are you excited?
Yeah, and I like Lamar a lot for tournaments, especially as a pivot off of CJ Anderson. I think he's going to keep getting fed, and I think he's a really talented back. But I got a hard time using him over CJ Anderson and D'Angelo Williams if I'm going to pay up at running back. And I can't imagine using either of those guys over CJ Anderson.
Yeah, the Chiefs allowed the second fewest fantasy points to running backs last season. I think that workload is going to be there even in the passing game, but I'm not going to be playing him in cash. And then we have Rashad Jennings, who's another great GPP play, kind of leverage play off of that Giants passing attack. The Saints allowed 6.3 yards per carry, most in the league, and 24 rushes for 151 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground, as well as 6 catches for 51 yards through the air. Last season, they allowed the second most fantasy points per game to running backs. Could definitely see this being a Jennings game.
Yeah, I think Jennings is interesting. And if you're like, if it wasn't going to rain, I would be like okay with, using Eli, Beckham, and Jennings. The weather is a little bit of concern for just using, like, stacking the whole game and then having things go completely off the script. And I think you probably don't want to use all of them. But if you're not using Eli at quarterback, then I think you can use Beckham and Jennings in cash. Or if you're using Eli and pairing him with using him with AJ Green instead, then I think you could use Eli and Rashad Jennings. But I wouldn't want to have all 3 of those guys.
Yeah, I definitely get what you're saying. I love Jennings in a GPP and maybe in cash if I'm pairing him with Eli, but still there's always the threat of, a Vereen game and just kind of rendering him kind of worthless. The last running back, or we have 2 more, I think, running backs on our list. One is Danny Woodhead, who I've heard being discussed in cash, but I don't like that at all. Kind of like in a GPP. Last week, he set a career high in carries with 16. He outsnapped Melvin Gordon 50-23. He outcarried him 16-14 and out-targeted him 5-0. This was despite the fact that San Diego led for 84% of the game. Completely different than what we saw last season, though Gordon did get the 2 rushing touchdowns. But given historical usage, I still feel like he's a GPP only play as of right now. And the Chargers beat writer went on Mike Clay's show recently and said he was surprised that Woodhead got this workload. He does think the team is more confident in Woodhead, but he thinks the target carry snap distribution will tilt more towards even going into next week.
Yeah. I have been back and forth on Woodhead like all week this week. And I feel like he has to be more involved now that they're probably going to be not as good of a team. And the Jags were a good rushing defense last year. So I think Woodhead is probably going to be involved. The real question is how involved. And Adam Levitan on his pod an hour ago brought up a good point that, maybe the Chargers just try and become a more power team. I don't know. We don't really know how this offense is going to look this week. So it's hard to know exactly what his role is going to be. But I think he has the one thing that he has on his side is he has a ton of upside, and his ceiling is a big role. I mean, shockingly, he got 16 carries last week. And if they run this shotgun up pace offense type thing when they're, behind all season, then maybe he continues to have that kind of a role. But I don't know. It's confusing. I think you could use him in cash games, but I'd feel a little worried about it, especially because he's 5,000, 5,200.
Yeah, I'm really not too in on him, but he definitely does have GPP upside for me. Too shaky in a cash game. Next up, we have Jonathan Stewart, who on Twitter I see a lot of people talking about, but kind of not on him at all. He doesn't catch passes. He gets vultured by his own quarterback, as well as the fullback. I think instead, LeGarrette Blount makes a ton of sense. At a cheaper price, he had over 20 carries last week. And that wasn't even, or I guess it kind of was, but this one, at least Vegas is projecting to be a Blount game. They're heavily favored. But he doesn't catch passes, so I'm really not on him in cash. Johnny, what do you think about Blount and Stewart?
So the thing that I keep, it's like if this Panthers game goes according to Vegas script and according to what everyone thinks, and they're just blowing out the 49ers, why the hell does anyone think that Jonathan Stewart's going to be carrying the ball in the second half? Like, that is not the running back that they're going to use to grind the game out. Like, a running back who is literally injured every time he touches the ball.
Yeah.
It's going to be Cameron Artis-Payne and Fozzie Whitaker running this game out. And we've seen Fozzie Whitaker and Cameron Artis-Payne have been involved this preseason with some starter snaps and in week 1. And there's no reason for them to give what you expect him to get 25 grind out the game carries with a 14-point lead. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen at all. Sure, maybe LeGarrette Blount's going to get 25 carries because, Belichick could give a shit if he ends up grinding into the ground. So I would much prefer using Blount over Jonathan Stewart, but this is Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, and we have no idea how, this is going to go. And just remember that Blount averaged 3.2 carries or 3.2 yards per carry against the Cardinals last week and only saved himself because he scored a touchdown. So if he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not paying off that $4,000 salary. So, I mean, good luck. I'm not playing a running back who has to have a touchdown for him to hit value for me, because no matter how good the game script is, you have no – I mean, if the Patriots, have a pick 6, what reason do they have to turn up the pace or anything? They're going to play it as slow as possible. If I'm picking a Patriot, it's the defense. Like, I'm just like – I'm not in on Blount at all, man.
Not even a GPP?
GPPs, yeah. I mean, the dude has like 3 touchdown upside, but not in cash games at all. No chance.
Yeah, I completely agree. Was there any other running back we haven't talked about?
All right. So I mentioned D'Angelo Williams. I think he's like, he's great for tournaments. The role is insane. If you want to pay up and use Williams and Anderson and then fill out your lineup, I would not be upset about that at all. But I really just don't have a negative for him. I like him this week as well. That role is just insane, as we've talked about many times. But a guy who is really interesting this week is Theo Riddick. He really actually saw a major increase in his role from last year. He saw some red zone carry work. He had 5 targets. He caught all 5 of them for 63 yards. And he actually saw a lot more rushing work than we sort of expected him to see. We thought they were going to have some kind of, red zone goal line type back like a Zach Zenner or like a Stephen Ridley, but it turned out that it was just Theo and Abdullah. And Theo actually left the game for something like a quarter and a half. So he saw those touches in only 3 quarters of work. So I think he's really interesting, but I think he's going to be someone who is sort of difficult to predict on a week-to-week basis. And interestingly, me and Scott have talked about him last year. He was a guy that people sort of considered as like an upside back last year, but in reality, he's more of like a floor back because of his PPR value. I don't know. How do you feel about Riddick, Scott?
Yeah, I'm really not too high on him. I think I could definitely see the Lions targeting him heavily and Abdullah heavily, but I just don't feel really good about it. In GPPs, I don't think he has too much of an upside, and even in cash, still not really sure what his role is. There's Abdullah's there, Dwayne Washington's there, stealing goal line carries. There's just a lot of uncertainty for me at this point. What's his price?
Riddick, 4,300.
Yeah, I don't know. He's just not someone I'm really too excited about, but I guess he's interesting.
He makes a lot of things work, and that's what's interesting. But the real question is Riddick or Fuller, because that's something that you end up with a lot if you're looking at that 4,200, 4,300 type player in your flex. I think I lean Fuller because I think his ceiling is way higher, and I think his role is more secure.
Yeah, I'd lean Fuller by a lot there.
Yeah. So, yep, I'm with you.
All right, tight ends.
Tight ends.
Yeah. Gary's got his boy back, man. Gary
Dude.
Barnidge.
Is he not like the cash game just nuts this week, dude?
So McCown's the starting quarterback. Everyone's off of Barnidge, or at least like all the fish are. He had 2 targets last week, and he dropped both of them. But McCown is starting, and that's all that matters. Last season, in the 8 games that McCown played in, Barnidge averaged 18.26 fantasy points per game. That was a higher point per game average than Jordan Reed, Rob Gronkowski, or any other tight end. If McCown throws a few touchdown passes, like me and Johnny think he will, gotta love Gary's chances of catching one.
Yeah, so Barnidge last year, he averaged 18 PPR points in the 8 games that he played with McCown, and he only averaged 11 in the games that he did not play with McCown. He also, played the Ravens twice with McCown last year, and he averaged 22 PPR points against them. And that was a Ravens defense that was actually pretty stingy against the tight end last year, and really the only guy who lit them up was Gary Barnidge twice. So he plays that same defense this year. And, man, I have a hard time not using Gary Barnidge in cash game lineups because I think that 4K price tag is just too cheap compared to the bromance that he's about to bring back with his boy Josh McCown.
Definitely love Barnidge. What about Delaney Walker? We were kind of high on him last week. I might want to go back to the well with him, especially with Sharp probably drawing shadow coverage from Slay. The Lions allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to tight ends last season, and last week up against the Colts, they allowed 3, 2 of which were a guy most people have never heard of.
Yeah, and that's the like, not only were we disappointed in Delaney his usage last week, so were the Titans. So the Titans were like, yeah, we like, why did we not give this guy the ball?
Yeah,
and you don't. The Titans though have oddly enough been like kind of honest this offseason, but he's Sharp. Sharp is probably going to see a lot of Slay, so Delaney Walker is going to be open in the middle of the field. Lions are pretty banged up at linebacker. I'm blanking right now on the name of their stud linebacker, but he has been banged up all offseason. I think that's obviously a weakness for them, and Delaney should be able to take full advantage of it. And I think his target share should go way up from last year, probably, or last week, and probably be closer to what we saw last year.
Yeah. Well, what about? I might be getting too sneaky here, but I'm not sure. What about Kobe Fleener in cash? And there was only 2 players who saw their price drop more than Fleener this week.
Were they either of them as bad as him?
Yeah, I think I just put the tweet out. Like, Breeze had like 450 passing yards, and Fleener had the 2nd most routes run on the team, and he only had like 4% of Breeze's passing yards. He was atrocious. He was really bad. But like Bales, like your employer Jonathan Bales, something he always talks about is targeting these guys who see their price drop a ton after just like 1 week. And it's like a volatile sport. It totally is. And this is the matchup to play him. Giants completely suck against tight ends. They allowed the most receptions and yards to tight ends last year. The 2nd most fantasy points last year. And then last week, they allowed 13, 10, 87 to the corpse of Jason Witten.
Yeah. Fucking Jason Witten. That's going to haunt me forever. And literally not only because he's a corpse, but because I just didn't play him. But so Fleener is like the GOAT GPP play this week at tight end. But there's no way in hell I can use him in cash games when he just essentially what we thought Fleener was going to be, Snead was instead. So, oh man, like all my MFL 10 shares, like RIP. But the offseason concerns that he sucks, which I was like one of the biggest people like Fleener sucks, and then I just like convinced myself instead, and you know what, Fleener sucks, man. So yeah, he could probably get some like serious work against a really bad interior, but I don't think we can trust that in cash games. I think if I'm gonna pick a guy to assault the interior of the Giants, it's gonna be Willie Snead. I just think he's so much safer than Kobe Fleener.
All right, that's fair. I think I agree with that. What about, all right, hear me out here. What about Eric Ebron? Per Evan Silva, Ebron's 91% snap rate was the second highest of his career.
Yeah, and I think it was really encouraging to see that he was healthy last week. That was the big concern for him coming into the season, was that he had that ankle injury, and we thought that he might be like dead. So he or no, it was a knee, ankle. I don't know. It looked really bad, but then it ended up not being that bad. So yeah, I am in on Ebron. I think that offense is going to target those three guys. I think that they're going to be concentrated, or those four guys, on Ebron, Riddick, Tate, and Marvin, and I think they're going to throw the ball. So for 3,500, he makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, and the Titans allowed the 8th most fantasy points to tight ends last season and the 3rd most touchdowns. So he definitely does have a nice upside. And then Dwayne Allen, who I'm not too sure of his health status at the moment. Johnny, you know what's going on with him?
Yeah, let me double check on that. But
Dwayne Allen went off last week. I remember I was really high on him. Luck threw 3 touchdowns to tight ends, and he could have gotten at least 2 of them maybe if he was on the field for that 3rd one. And he's in a good matchup again at a decent price.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like there's much talk about Dwayne Allen's injury on Twitter. So good question. But this is it's a great matchup. This is where you attack the Denver Broncos. They have, the most studly group of wide receivers we may have ever seen. And so, you have to attack them in the interior instead, because you cannot do it on the outside. So we don't have a whole lot of updates, but I guess if Dwayne Allen is out and not playing, is Jack Doyle in play?
Yeah, I definitely think he is. Again, it's a sneaky good matchup. Last year, 25% of Denver's targets allowed went to tight ends, which was the 2nd most. And 26% of their fantasy points allowed went to tight ends, which was the 3rd most.
Yeah.
And
he's 2,500 if Dwayne Allen doesn't play. So I think
crazy. Yeah.
one or the other.
Even Dwayne Allen, if he does play, his price only jumped by like $400.
Yeah.
Denver allowed the 5th most targets and the 12th most fantasy points to tight ends last year. Yeah, this is a really good matchup. People don't realize it because they just see Denver and they're like, oh shit, let me go somewhere else. But yeah, it's a pretty good matchup for tight ends. He's a good price. He's going to get that red zone usage. Yeah, I like it. It just depends on if he's healthy, and then if he's not, then Jack Doyle must start. Couldn't work that into a catchy name, but
dude, I actually, for some reason, I was thinking that Dwayne Allen had practiced, but now that I'm seeing nothing on him, I'm now realizing that Jack Doyle might be like a cash game. Don't quote me though. Might be a really locked in cash game play.
Are we improving this right now?
Oh man, dude, I don't know why I didn't realize Dwayne Allen was legitimately hurt. I thought it was not that big of a deal. So
I was relying on you to do this research that I didn't want to do. By the way, and T.Y. Hilton missed practice with an injury fairly recently. I think he's going to play, though.
Yeah, I think he's fine, though. But no, that's interesting on Allen. Okay, guys. Google some Dwayne Allen this weekend. Yeah.
Right, I'm pulling up the injury report. I got to double check this.
Okay, so I'll move on to another tight end while you do that. So another guy that is probably going to be popular this weekend now that Keenan Allen is dead is Antonio Gates. Gates saw his role increase when Keenan Allen went down last year, and he was they limited his snaps a little bit in week 1 because that's just what they do for Antonio Gates because he's old. But now that Keenan Allen is gone, they're probably not going to be able to do that. So we should see him with an increased role, and I think that he will probably take over a lot of those interior routes and receptions that Keenan Allen is going to have vacated. Thoughts on Gates, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to play the old guy, you're going to play him in week 2. I'm not seeing Dwayne Allen on the practice report. I think he's going to play. I think he's fine.
Yeah, I don't see much on him. I think he's probably
he's not even on the the injury practice report, whatever it's called.
That's why I got so confused, I guess.
Right.
Anyways, yeah. So Dwayne Allen makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Also, Jordan Reed. I think you kind of afford to pay up for him this week.
Yeah, and I think he's probably someone who is going to see a lot more work after they shit the bed this week. Saw 11 targets. You're not going to find that at tight end. So, I mean, are you going to find that at wide receiver for 6,800 for a stud getting 11 targets? None of the studs did other than AJ Green last week. So,
and all the red zone usage probably too.
Yeah, and they didn't score. I think Gruden said they're going to run a lot more of the hurry up this week. So I think his role is safe. He's the number one option in that offense. It did hurt to see that Deshaun Jackson was as involved as he was. I think that hurts Reed a little bit, but he's still, the tight end 1 if you're not considering price this week. So he's definitely in play, but I'll probably go cheap.
All right, I guess moving on to defenses. I didn't write any defenses out because I just hate defenses.
Dude, I got some.
All right, well, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, but I gotta go. All right, but I'll come back and I'll catch the tail end.
So, yeah. So I guess the mega chalk on defense, if you're gonna pay up, is gonna be the Panthers. Even in a game they lost, they had 2 interceptions, defense fumble recovery, 2 sacks. Scored 8 fantasy points in a game that they didn't really play all that well in. So this week they're going to get the 49ers who they get 10 days to prepare for them. The 49ers get a short week because they played on Monday night. Panthers should just probably brutalize this 49ers offense. So as someone who doesn't pay up for defense a lot, they make a ton of sense this weekend because the 10 days versus the 6 days to prepare is just is huge. And they're probably going to be the most popular defense. Then the next defense that, people are probably going to play the Seahawks against the Rams after seeing how bad the Rams look last week. That's not really something that I'm on. I think the Rams are going to show up this week, and Russell Wilson might be hurt. So Vegas hasn't really, last I looked, they hadn't made a line for this yet. So I probably don't want to play the Seahawks D on the road against the Rams yet. I was just saying Panthers are probably the chalk. Not really interested in the Seahawks D on the road, which I've seen people talk about against the Rams with Russell Wilson possibly hurt.
Why are you talking about expensive defenses?
No, I'm saying the Panthers are the chalk. Like, they are going to be the most popular defense against the 49ers.
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Did you talk about who you're looking at? Yeah,
so I'm really in on the Patriots this week. They're at home. They're against Ryan Tannehill, who just looked like he didn't have a fucking clue what was going on last week, and an offense that just couldn't move the ball at all. And the Patriots know how to scheme against teams that don't have a whole lot of options. And it looks like the Dolphins only have Foster and they only have Landry. So the Patriots are going to scheme against those two guys, and I think they're going to get tons of pressure on Tannehill, and he's a guy who makes a ton of mistakes. What do you think, Scott?
I think that's good. I'm kind of on the Jaguars.
I was getting there next.
Against the Chargers without Keenan Allen. I had the split somewhere on Twitter, and it's like really crazy how terrible they were without Keenan Allen. Again, it's like a noisy stat just because they had so many other injuries at other positions. But I mean, the Jaguars are supposed to be this like much improved defense, but they're 100 away from being the stone cold minimum. I like them a lot. I think they're a pretty good player. And you like them too, Johnny?
Yeah. The big downside for the Jags this week is that they are on the road and they are traveling to San Diego. So at least the plus, though, is that it's a 4:25 game. So at least they're not traveling to San Diego. If they were traveling to San Diego for a 1 p.m. game, I wouldn't play them.
So here's the stat. In the 8 games that Keenan Allen played with the Chargers offense last season, they averaged 24 points per game and 352 passing yards per game. Without him, they averaged only 16.1 points per game and 254.9 passing yards per game. It's about a difference of 8 points per game and 100 passing yards per game. That's crazy.
No, dude, I'm with you. And like, I wish they were at home, but no, I am in on the Jaguars. I think that they'll probably, and think about this is that the Chargers had spent all offseason prepping as if Keenan Allen was going to be their guy, and they now have 1 week to prepare a whole new offense to play the Jaguars. So I think they're going to struggle. But for me right now, the 3 defenses I'm looking at, there's only 3 on my list for cash, and it's the Jaguars, the Patriot.
Yeah, how do you pronounce that? The Jaguars?
You want me to say Jaguars?
That's how you're saying it.
Like I live in a fucking penthouse.
Yeah, why are you? I'm usually the one who pronounces names wrong. Why are you the one pronouncing it like it's a car like your grandfather drives? Your wealthy grandfather who sips gin and tonics at 3 p.m. and
those are the only people that drive those cars, dude. They're Jaguars. It's fine. So the Patriots and the Panthers. I think those are the only defenses that you really have in consideration for cash games. And the Panthers are more like you really love your lineup and you have 4,000 left over, then fire them up. I think they're gonna wreck the 49ers, but Jags and Patriots both make a ton of sense. I just want to say people were talking about the Ravens a whole lot on Twitter and stuff. I'm not buying it. You playing the Ravens this week, Scott?
No, I'm not, but only because you're my Ravens homer, and I'm taking your word for it. So when you talk about that,
I just the Ravens. I mean, the Bills had like no identity last week without Sammy Watkins. Like they didn't realize Sammy Watkins was hurt until like in that game, pretty much. So they didn't really know what to do. Tyrod Taylor looked like super confused. And so the Ravens didn't really do much. I mean, like they sort of killed the Bills and they scored 6 fantasy points. So, and they only allowed 7 points against. I mean, they had 2 sacks against a quarterback who looked like he was running around with his head cut off. I mean, no way, man. Josh McCown lit them up last year, and Elvis Dumervil probably won't play. Suggs is like slowly working his way back. The only thing they really added to this defense is Eric Weddle. And last year, you wouldn't have been playing the Ravens against anyone. So, yeah, no way, man.
All right. Agreed. You want to build a lineup?
Yeah. I'm just going to plug, though. If you guys are tracking your stats, you want to know how you're doing, what games you're good at, what games you're bad at, go ahead and check out Roto Tracker. If you want to support the pod, you like us, and you're interested in Roto Tracker, go to rototracker.com/DFS Power Hour. We would really appreciate it. Build a lineup. We can't build a complete lineup because of the community rules.
We'll just leave off defense. It's fine.
We can't do that either.
People can guess.
But
all right.
How about we're gonna go ahead and start with like our locks, and then you guys can fill out the lineup from there.
Josh McCown, C.J. Anderson, Jeremy Langford, Odell Beckham Jr.
We can't use Langford, dude, because it's Sunday only.
Well, we have both. We have like 75% Thursday and to Monday.
But viewers do not have Monday players, man.
Why not?
All right, dude. All right.
We'll take him out. We'll do Yeldon instead.
So I'm doing McCown, Beckham, CJ, AJ Green.
Not yet.
Okay. Jags defense.
Yeah.
Second running back. Are we using Yeldon?
Yeah, McCown, Yeldon, Anderson, Odell Beckham, Jaguars defense.
And then Curley.
Sneed. How about Sneed?
Sneed.
Could we do both?
Sneed and Curley.
It's gonna be a lot left over.
It's 4,000. They can figure out their tight end. Nah, so if you end up with McCown, Anderson, Yeldon, Beckham, Green, and Jaguars, you can do so much with that wide receiver, tight end, and flex spot with 42.66 per player. You want to mess around with a Eli Manning lineup?
Hold on, I'm just looking at this right now. So you could do, you could do everything we just said. You do McCown, Yeldon, Anderson, Beckham, Curley, Sneed, Allen, Dwayne Allen, AJ Green, Jaguars, and have 400 left over. Or you could take out Green. You could put Reed at tight end. And then in your flex, go like Michael Crabtree, Emmanuel Sanders, Michael Floyd, DeMarco Murray, who I said I liked a lot, Marvin Jones, still have a lot left over. I'm not sure which I like more. I guess maybe the Green Dwayne Allen lineup. Yeah, you want to play around with an Eli lineup?
Yes, let's do an Eli lineup. Let's start with we're going to do Eli and AJ Green or Eli and Beckham?
You said you only wanted to go with one.
All right, let's do Eli, AJ Green then. We're going to throw Curley in.
Yeah.
And then since we don't have Josh McCown, we might as well throw Barnage in. Second running back, are we still going to use Yeldon?
Yeah.
So we got Eli Manning, CJ Anderson, TJ Yeldon, AJ Green, Jeremy Curley, Gary Barnage at tight end. We looking at Willie Snead again? How much do we like? I like Willie Snead a lot.
I mean, we don't with this lineup. We just have so much money left over. It doesn't really make sense. Like we can go Eli, Yeldon, CJ, AJ, Curley, Edelman, Barnage, DeMarco Murray, Patriots. Or if you wanted to go Snead instead of Edelman and take out Murray.
Or you can put Dwayne Allen in your or D'Angelo Williams in your flex, Marvin Jones in as your wide receiver 3, play the Jags D and use Barnage.
Ooh, that's sneaky. I like that.
Yeah. Dude, there's so much you can do this week.
Yeah, there's honestly, I feel really confident about the guys that I talked about that I like. There's really a lot to do this week. I built like 10 lineups and I really like all of them.
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good cash week.
I'm in on it, man.
Yeah.
I think we built some sweet stuff. We good on this week?
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a lineup together tomorrow, I guess.
Yes, sir. All right, man. Should we close it out?
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. This has been the DFS Power Hour podcast for the NFL Week 2 slate. Find me on Twitter at John Proctor DFS. Find me on Fantasy Labs and 2QBs. Find Scott on Twitter at Scott Barrett DFB. And find him on Pro Football Focus and fanvice.com. Thanks for tuning in, guys.